Welcome to the Deep Dive. Okay, so here we are. It's October 2nd, 2025, day 2 of the government shutdown. And, while Congress is grabbing headlines, we're actually zeroing in on the White House today.
That's right, because the big story isn't really about the negotiations right now. It's about execution. President Trump has been really public, calling this shutdown an unprecedented opportunity.
An opportunity to do what exactly?
Well, to fundamentally restructure the executive branch. He just announced he's meeting with his OMB director, Russell Vought, specifically to decide which, quote, Democrat agencies should be cut permanently.
And he specifically name-checked Vought, calling him he of Project 2025 fame. So this is it. This is the moment Vought, the guy who literally co-wrote the playbook for reshaping the government, tries to make it real.
Exactly. He's moving from the blueprint to the battlefield, so to speak.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We're challenging that narrative, the one painting Vought as this, brilliant, disciplined architect who's got everything perfectly planned.
Right. We're digging into the source material, the memos, the warnings from legal experts, the economic data to figure out, is he really this mastermind smoothly taking control?
Or is he maybe more of an incompetent chaos merchant? Someone whose big power plays are actually just causing managerial screw-ups, legal headaches, and crucially, inflicting real, measurable costs on regular Americans.
That's the core question. We want the receipts on this disorder. Is it strategy or is it just messy failure?
So today we're going to unpack the evidence of that managerial confusion. We'll dissect the pretty serious legal risks tied up in his mass firing plans.
And we'll spotlight the specific, quantifiable pain points, the budget cuts hitting people and programs, pain that's actually causing alarm on both sides of the aisle because it's messing with basic government function. Okay, so first, you really have to get Vaught's whole ideology. This isn't just about trimming the budget. It's way bigger than that. It's like an institutional overhaul he's aiming for.
He's Mr. Project 2025, right? Co-author, founder of the Center for Renewing America. And he calls himself a Christian nationalist. That tells you a lot about the framework.
It absolutely does. And his stated goal, he's been very open about it, is to bring what he calls the woke and weaponized bureaucracy to heel.
Yeah, I remember those quotes. He literally talked about putting the federal workforce in trauma and deconstructing this administrative state. Strong words.
Very strong. And people around him, like Senator Mike Lee, they reinforced this idea. Lee said Vought spent years meticulously preparing for this exact moment, seeing OMB as the key tool to, quote, tame the bureaucracy.
Okay, so the narrative is meticulous planning, disciplined execution, total control, aimed at reshaping the government.
That is the narrative.
Yeah.
But then you look at what's actually happening on the ground, according to the sources we have. And that narrative, well, it kind of hits a wall.
Okay.
It seems like Vaught's detailed plans keep getting tripped up by the, let's call it, make-it-up-as-you-go style of this administration. This is where that chaos merchant idea starts to feel pretty real.
So internal conflict, things not going according to the master plan.
Exactly. The clearest example seems to be this friction between Vaught's OMB, the policy guys, the budget experts, and this new entity, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE.
Ah, yes, DOGE, initially headed up by Elon Musk. Right? Their approach seemed different, less meticulous, more sledgehammer.
That's a good way to put it. DOGE was apparently all about brute force disruption, just sort of breaking things quickly. Haphazard chaos is the phrase used in some reports.
And Vought, the meticulous planner, how did he react to that?
Well, reports suggest he was really frustrated. He felt, quote, sidelined and undermined. You have these two competing strategies trying to achieve the same anti-bureaucracy goal, and they're apparently stepping on each other's toes.
The blueprint versus the sledgehammer.
Right. And Vought reportedly even told colleagues something pretty revealing. He basically said, we're going to let DOGE break things and we'll pick up the pieces later.
Wow. Okay, that doesn't sound like someone confidently executing a grand vision. That sounds like damage control.
Yeah.
Or maybe just frustration.
It certainly sounds like someone acknowledging a lack of control and maybe poor internal coordination, right? It undercuts the whole mastermind narrative.
And we have a specific example of this confusion in action, don't we? The incident at the education department.
Yes, this is a perfect little case study. It really highlights the irony of needing the very bureaucracy you're trying to dismantle to achieve your goals.
So what happened there?
DOGE, in its rush to show results, apparently targeted the Education Department's data office for dismantling. This is the office that tracks things like student academic performance, demographics, program effectiveness.
Seems like low-hanging fruit if you just want to quit bureaucracy, I guess.
You'd think so, except Vaught's own policy agenda needs that specific data.
Ah. Okay, explain that.
Well, think about Vaught's priorities for education. Pushing back on race-based admissions, promoting certain curricula, boosting charter schools, cutting programs for poor or disabled students. To make the case for any of that, or to even implement it effectively, you need detailed, reliable data on student outcomes.
Which is exactly what that office provides.
Precisely. So when DOGE moved to just, get rid of the data infrastructure, Vaught's team suddenly realized they'd shot themselves in the foot. They disabled the very tools they needed for their own agenda.
So Vought had to backtrack.
Immediately, reports say he had to scramble to restore at least parts of that office, trying to get essential data collection back online, even with limited staff because of the shutdown context.
That's incredibly inefficient. It's the opposite of streamlining. It's creating chaos, then spending resources to fix the chaos you just created.
It's a perfect example of managerial failure driven by this sort of internal disorder. The goal might be to shrink the state, but if you randomly break the tools you need to do it strategically, you're just making a mess.
And does this confusion have immediate consequences beyond just, looking bad?
Oh, absolutely. Sources indicate that things like grant applications, the ones that require specific data on demographic impact, they just stalled. They ground to a halt because the system to generate that data was suddenly offline or impaired.
So managerial screw-ups translate directly into delays, delayed policy, delayed aid.
Right out of the gate, yeah.
Okay, so the picture emerging in this first part is Vought, the ideologue with a plan, running smack into the operational chaos of his own administration. The vision is there, but the execution seems messy, undermined from within.
And that messiness, that potential for legal trouble, really escalates when we look at how he's trying to use the shutdown itself as a weapon against the workforce.
Yeah, this is probably Vaught's most radical move so far, and where the chaos merchant label really starts to bite. We're used to shutdowns meaning furloughs, right? People go home temporarily, usually get paid back later.
Right. It's disruptive, but it's temporary. Vaught's trying to change the game. He seems to be using this funding gap as a justification, or maybe cover, to push for permanent mass firings, to actually reshape the workforce drastically right now.
How's he trying to do that? What's the mechanism?
The key thing is this memo that OMB circulated. It directed agencies to start preparing major reduction in force plans, RIFs.
RIFs. Okay, reduction in force. That sounds serious.
It is. And Vought was apparently telling House Republicans these mass firings could start happening in a day or two.
A day or two? That sounds incredibly fast for government personnel actions.
It's basically unheard of.
Yeah.
And the stated goal, according to sources, was pretty explicit. Use the shutdown to target agencies perceived as not aligning with the president's values and ram through workforce cuts they couldn't easily achieve through normal processes.
But you said RIF. That's different from a furlough, right? It's not just sending people home without pay temporarily.
Totally different. And this is the crucial point, the legal and procedural heart of the matter. A furlough is temporary leave due to lack of funds. A RIF is a formal legal process for permanently separating employees. It involves things like bumping rights, severance pay, appeal processes.
Okay, unpack that RIF process a bit more. Why is it usually slow and complicated?
Because it has to be. Federal regulations around RIFs are incredibly detailed. They're designed to protect career civil servants from arbitrary political firings and ensure fairness. It's not supposed to be a quick political tool.
So what are the big hurdles Vaught's trying to leap over with this day or two timeline?
Well, first, there's usually a mandatory notice period. Agencies typically have to give employees at least 60 days written notice before a RIF takes effect. That notice has specific legal requirements about why it's happening, when, and what the employee's rights are.
60 days, not 1 or 2.
Exactly. Then there's the competition process. It's complex. Employees are grouped by job types and grade level, and then they basically compete to keep their jobs based on clear criteria. How long they've served, veteran status, performance ratings, seniority. It takes time and careful documentation to do this right.
That sounds like a massive administrative lift, even when the government is fully funded and staffed. Doing it during a shutdown when presumably most of the HR and legal folks needed to run this process are themselves furloughed.
It seems practically impossible from a managerial standpoint.
And legally.
That's where it gets even shakier. Multiple legal experts are saying it's likely illegal. The main reason comes down to a law called the Anti-Deficiency Act.
Okay, the Anti-Deficiency Act, what does that do?
It's an old law, 19th century, but fundamental. It strictly prohibits federal officials from spending money they don't have, or from obligating the government to spend money in the future if Congress hasn't appropriated it. During a shutdown, appropriations have lapsed. So agencies cannot legally incur new financial obligations.
And how does trying to ram through a RIF violate that?
Because the RIF process itself creates new financial obligations. Think about it. Severance pay. Employees separated through RIF might be legally entitled to severance, which is a future financial commitment.
Okay, that's a direct cost.
Right. But also the administrative costs of running the RIF. You might need to keep essential HR and legal staff working, incurring salary obligations to manage the process, handle appeals, defend against lawsuits.
Lawsuits seem inevitable if you're rushing this.
Absolutely. And paying out settlements or back pay if the RIF is challenged and found unlawful. All of that represents financial commitments that, during a shutdown, haven't been approved by Congress.
So Vaught's memo is essentially directing agencies to break the law.
That's the argument being made very forcefully. Representative James Walkinshaw was quoted saying exactly that the directive forces agencies to incur these illegal obligations, severance, legal liabilities. It's precisely what the Anti-Deficiency Act is meant to prevent when funds aren't available.
And what do former budget officials say? People who know OMB.
Bobby Kogan, who used to be at OMB, was very skeptical. He basically said, "It doesn't seem to me that they would really be able to legally do that additional work during a shutdown." It confirms the view that this isn't just bad management, it's legally dubious.
So if it's so complex, legally risky, maybe impossible, why even float this RIF idea? Is the chaos itself the point? Just to scare people, to create trauma, like you said.
That certainly seems like part of it. Political intimidation, demoralization. But it's a strategy built on incredibly shaky ground, and we saw something similar blow up earlier this year, didn't we?
You mean at the National Nuclear Security Administration, the NNSA?
Exactly. They tried a rapid firing of, up to 350 employees?
Yeah, and then they had to reverse it just days later, right?
Yeah.
Because of the backlash, national security worries. It was a total mess.
A total mess. It showed that these kinds of aggressive, legally questionable personnel actions can collapse really quickly when they hit the reality of existing laws, operational needs, and public outcry. Vaught's RIF memo feels like that same kind of high-risk gamble.
It feels like political theater, maybe, but theater with potentially massive legal and operational consequences.
And importantly, if your stated goal is efficiency or making government work better, this RIF strategy does the exact opposite. It creates paralysis, forces agencies to divert resources to legal battles instead of their mission, and likely racks up more costs in the long run through lawsuits.
So it's managerial failure again, but this time potentially exposing the government to huge legal risks, all dressed up as being tough and decisive.
Right. And beyond the internal chaos and the legal jeopardy, we absolutely have to focus on the immediate real-world consequences. This isn't theoretical. Vaught's strategy, this maximalist chaos, is causing measurable pain right now.
Okay, let's talk scale first. What kind of disruption are we looking at? What are the numbers?
The potential scale is huge. The CBO, Congressional Budget Office, estimated that maybe 750,000 federal workers could end up furloughed in this shutdown. Now, the White House tried to downplay the RIF numbers, saying permanent layoffs would likely going to be in the thousands, but even that's significant.
And the broader economic impact.
Well, the Treasury Secretary herself, Scott Bessent, put out a warning. She said the shutdown could mean a hit to the GDP, a hit to growth, and a hit to working America. So we're talking macroeconomic consequences.
And it's not just federal paychecks being delayed, is it? It ripples out.
Absolutely. Think about government contractors. So much federal work is done by private companies, often small businesses. When agencies shut down, the money flow stops. Contract oversight halts. Invoices don't get processed. New work orders aren't signed.
Do we have examples of that?
Yeah, there was one specific report about a contractor in Virginia. Their main business is maintaining IT systems for a federal agency. The shutdown meant an immediate payment freeze, Plus, scheduled upgrade work just stopped. They estimated losing maybe a quarter of their expected revenue just in the first week.
A quarter of their revenue. For a small business, that could be fatal.
Exactly. Vought talks about putting the bureaucracy in trauma, but for these businesses, that trauma could mean going under, bankruptcy, layoffs in the private sector.
And it seems Vought isn't just letting this pain happen as collateral damage. Reports suggest he is actively directing some of the cuts for political reasons, right? Using the budget as a weapon against opponents.
Oh, clearly. The targeting seems pretty blatant. On day one, literally day one of the shutdown, OMB under Vought moved to freeze funding for two huge New York City transit projects, about $18 billion combined.
Which projects were those?
The Gateway Tunnel, that's the critical rail tunnel under the Hudson between New Jersey and Manhattan, and the expansion of the 2nd Avenue subway, both absolutely vital infrastructure projects for the region.
Freezing $18 billion for projects like that. That's not just trimming fat, that's hitting a nerve center.
And everyone saw it immediately for what it likely was, a not-so-thinly veiled shot at Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, and Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, both Democrats, both from New York.
So using critical infrastructure funding for millions of people as political leverage against Democratic leaders.
It certainly looks like punitive budget management, not fiscal prudence. And it wasn't just New York.
What else?
There was also an immediate freeze announced on about $8 billion in energy funding. This money was spread across 16 different states.
And what was the connection between those 16 states?
Well, analysts quickly pointed out the pattern. Every single one of those 16 states voted for former Vice President Kamala Harris in the 2024 election.
So funds for things like renewable energy projects, climate resilience, targeted specifically at states that voted Democratic.
That's what it looks like. Senator Patty Murray called it ugly intimidation tactics, basically weaponizing the budget.
Okay, so there's targeted pain aimed at political opponents. But the irony, the real sign of maybe poor planning or just chaos, is that these moves are apparently also hurting the administration's own supporters, right?
Yeah.
The Republican base.
This is maybe the most striking example of the chaos merchant failing to think through the consequences. I'm talking about the impact on the agricultural sector.
How so?
Because the shutdown meant the closure of thousands of USDA offices, specifically the Farm Service Agency or FSA offices.
And farmers rely on those FSA offices.
Critically, especially right now. It's harvest season for many crops across the country. Farmers depend on FSA offices for essential services during harvest, things like getting operating loans, that crucial cash flow they need to pay for harvesting costs, labor storage, and also for processing things like crop insurance claims if there are issues.
So closing these offices right at harvest time cuts off their financial lifeline.
Precisely. A farmer waiting for an FSA loan to pay the bills simply can't operate. It hits a core Republican constituency right where it hurts, at the worst possible time.
And are Republicans noticing this? Acknowledging the self-inflicted wound?
They are. Even the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, who's a Republican from South Dakota, a big farm state, he acknowledged the pain hitting their own constituents. He called the FSA closures an unnecessary consequence of the shutdown strategy.
Unnecessary consequence. That's telling.
It really is. And the administration had to react almost immediately. They put out a statement saying they'd try to make sure at least one farm loan officer was available in most areas if the shutdown went longer than 10 days.
So a scramble to fix a problem they created themselves.
Exactly. It's damage control after the fact. It shows the initial slash and burn wasn't really thought through in terms of who it would actually harm, including their own supporters. It's reactive, inefficient, and highlights that managerial ineptitude again.
So the pattern seems clear. Use budget cuts like a weapon against opponents, but wield it so clumsily that you end up hurting your own side and causing broad economic disruption that even your own Treasury Secretary is warning about. The chaos seems to be creating vulnerability, not strength.
And this level of disruption, the legal risks, the sheer operational messiness Vought is creating, it's starting to generate pushback from across the political spectrum. It's not just Democrats yelling anymore. There's real concern about stability, even within the GOP.
Let's start there with the Republicans. You mentioned Senate Majority Leader Thune was acknowledging the pain for farmers. How did he react more broadly to Vaught's whole approach?
He was noticeably, let's say, unenthusiastic. He explicitly refused to endorse what he called Vaught's slash and burn campaign.
He used that term, slash and burn.
Yes. And he publicly worried that Vaught's actions, the targeted cuts, the RIF threats, were muddying the waters for the Republican message. basically making it harder for them to argue the shutdown was about fiscal responsibility when it looked so much like political retaliation harming ordinary people.
Did he try to distance the party from Vaught's actions?
It sounded like it. He actually warned Democrats, saying, "We don't control what he's going to do." Which is quite an admission, right? It signals that Vaught's moves are seen as potentially damaging to the party's image and maybe even outside their direct control or approval.
And it's not just leadership expressing concern. What about rank and file or moderate Republicans?
We know there's been direct pushback there, too. Reports surfaced about a private call where several Republican representatives, Mike Lawler from New York, Blake Moore from Utah, Brian Babin from Texas, directly confronted Vaught.
About what specifically?
About the mass layoff threats, the RIF memo, and also about those specific funding holds, like the Gateway tunnel money being frozen. Their concern wasn't really ideological, it was practical. Vaught's decisions were creating huge problems back in their districts, hurting their constituents directly.
So the operational chaos is causing political headaches even for his own party.
It seems to be internally destabilizing, yes. But this immediate chaos, the managerial failure, we need to connect it to what might be Vaught's much bigger, longer-term strategic goal, and that involves a major legal fight over presidential power.
You're talking about the Impoundment Control Act.
Exactly. This is where Vaught, the chaos merchant creating immediate problems, might actually be playing a longer game as a legal strategist. He sees the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, the law passed, after Nixon basically refused to spend money Congress told him to spend. He sees that act as unconstitutional, as improperly limiting the president's power.
So the current budget fights, the shutdown itself, they're not just about immediate cuts. They're about setting up a test case.
That appears to be a major part of the strategy. He wants to force a constitutional showdown over who ultimately controls federal spending: Congress, which appropriates the money, or the president, who executes the budget.
And how is he trying to force that showdown right now?
Through a very aggressive and legally questionable tactic called a pocket rescission. Normally, if a president wants to cancel funding Congress has already approved, they need to ask Congress for permission. That's a standard rescission.
Okay.
A pocket rescission is an attempt to cancel funds unilaterally, without congressional approval, by exploiting certain timing loopholes or recesses. Vaught is currently trying to use this maneuver to cancel $4.9 billion in foreign aid.
$4.9 billion. Just canceling it. Defying Congress's direction to spend it.
That's the attempt. It's a direct challenge to Congress's core constitutional power, the power of the purse.
And how are the official watchdogs reacting?
Predictably. The Government Accountability Office, the GAO, which is Congress's nonpartisan investigator, immediately looked at this and ruled it illegal. The GAO was very clear. The president, quote, does not have the unilateral power to change the laws, and Vaught is unlawfully impounding funds, basically refusing to spend money as legally required.
But here's the twist, right? Vaught probably expected the GAO to say that. He might even want them to say that.
That seems to be the whole point. He's deliberately provoking a legal conflict. The strategy appears to be get sued over this, take it up through the courts, and hope that the current Supreme Court will side with the White House and overturn the Impoundment Control Act entirely.
Which would fundamentally shift the balance of power between Congress and the president.
Massively. Legal experts are warning this threatens a serious erosion of the long-standing checks and balances. If the president can just ignore congressional spending mandates whenever they want, then Congress's power to direct policy through funding is severely weakened.
So let's connect the dots here. The day-to-day chaos we've been talking about, the DOGE mess, the botched RIF plan, the clumsy cuts hurting farmers, could that all be, in a way, secondary, maybe even intentional noise?
It's a disturbing thought, but yes. The argument could be that the operational failures, the managerial ineptitude, are just the messy byproduct, or perhaps even a deliberate tactic to create pressure and instability.
Instability that then justifies or necessitates these larger power grabs. Or instability that provides cover while the real fight happens in the courts.
Either way, the immediate chaos inflicted by the chaos merchant might be seen by Vaught as a necessary step towards achieving that ultimate goal. A Supreme Court ruling that dramatically expands presidential power over the purse, effectively gutting the very laws he keeps running afoul of, like the Anti-Deficiency Act implications of the RIF plan.
Hashtag tag outro. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. What's the bottom line for you listening to this deep dive? When we look at all the source material together, the picture of Russell Vaught that emerges isn't really the disciplined mastermind that Project 2025 promised. It looks much more like, Well, an operationally challenged leader, a chaos merchant whose tactics are causing real, measurable harm.
Yeah, the evidence seems pretty strong on that front. We've walked through the clear signs of managerial failure. Remember the DOGE conflict and that whole Education Department data office mess.
Right, total confusion.
We've looked at the serious legal risks, especially with those RAF memos. They seem like a direct path to violating the Anti-Deficiency Act, opening the government up to lawsuits and liabilities.
And we documented the real costs, the potential hit to GDP, the $18 billion in infrastructure funds frozen seemingly for political payback, the farm services cut off, hurt in their own base.
Exactly. The quantifiable damage is there.
So, Vought talks about boldness to bend or break the bureaucracy. But in practice, it seems to be causing mostly pain and uncertainty. For federal workers, definitely. For contractors, absolutely. And for citizens who just need basic government services to work, whether it's a farm loan or a transportation project.
The disorder really looks like a vulnerability, not a strength. And it puts the onus back on Congress, doesn't it? To step up and reassert its fundamental control over spending, the power of the purse.
But connecting back to that Empowerment Control Act fight, there's that lingering, more provocative thought.
Which is?
That the true cost of Vought's trauma campaign might not just be the program's cut or the immediate economic pain. It might be the deliberate, long-term effort to dismantle the legal guardrails themselves, things like the Empowerment Control Act, the rules around RIFs, the Anti-Deficiency Act, the very things designed to ensure some level of stability and prevent exactly this kind of chaos.
So the provocative question we leave you with is this. What if Vought is strategically using this chaos? What if creating this mess is part of the plan to force a Supreme Court showdown that ultimately grants the presidency far more unilateral power?
If that's the case, then paradoxically, could his current run of managerial failures actually be the necessary groundwork for his ultimate long-term success in reshaping American governance? It frames this shutdown not just as incompetence, but potentially as a calculated step towards blowing up the system.
Something to definitely keep watching. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.